grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? This is Matt McPeak here with the Week 2 preview of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm here with Adam Natras. What's going on, man? How you doing?
What's going on, everybody? I'm good.
We are going to start off the podcast talking a little bit of daily fantasy. Some guys that me and Adam both like for both either it's the high volume, the high value guys that we see getting good volume, or it's the low value guys that we see having big games. And then we're just going to get right into it, and we're going to go through every single game. So let's kick it off with some running backs, the position everybody loves. It's the most important position in fantasy football, I'd say. So some of the guys that I see having big games, good matchups this week: Joe Mixon, McCaffrey, and Cooks. Dalvin Cook. Sorry. Some of the high value or high dollar guys that I think are worth paying up for this week. Some of the mid-tier guys, James White and Adrian Peterson, I think should see another 20-plus touch game. So I like him again for Week 2. Adam, who are some of the running backs that you were looking at?
So I put a little bit of a spin on it this week. Instead of going high and low, I'm just going to give you guys some low money options. Because early on, last week you could have had $10,000 left in your FanDuel daily fantasy account and one big. Mm-hmm. So I'm liking. You already mentioned AP. I like Isaiah Crowell. Interesting to see what he can do again. He looks like he's their guy in the red zone, and I think they're going to get into the red zone. Surprisingly, I think everybody's a little surprised by that. No,
by the New York Football Jets.
Yeah, I never actually considered the word football in their name because normally they're such a doormat that you just kind of chuckle, but. Maybe not. Maybe they did get the right quarterback since Joe Namath. But we'll leave that for a different time. Anyways, I went Tyreek Cohen, Dion Lewis, and I had to put Dalvin Cook on there as well. Obviously we'll highlight why some of those guys are on there, but Dalvin's price this week is just, they're sleeping on him. Let them.
Yeah, I wonder what that is for. I think
Latavius
Murray did get a couple, a decent amount of work last week.
Well, I don't think it's as much that they like Latavius Murray as that they're trying to keep that, the Carson Wentz theory. They're just trying to ease Dalvin back in by snap count and stuff. Right. But, one good play, and that kid's
Makes
gone.
Sense.
And then wide receivers, Allen Robinson, low price. Someone out of the two in Brandon Marshall or Tyler Lockett, both going to be steals. I'm not even going to try and say his first name, so I'm just going to say Allison or Cobb from the Green Bay Packers. Something like Geronimo.
Yeah, Geronimo, man.
Geronimo Allison. Hey, all right. Kenny Galladay and Quincy Enunwa.
Yeah, I like Quincy a lot, dude.
Yeah, he looked good.
Yeah, some of the other wide receivers I see getting a decent amount of volume this week is going to be Aguilar with the Eagles and Corey Davis. Depending on the quarterback situation in Tennessee, I could see Corey Davis getting another one of these. He got 13 targets on Sunday, so I could see him getting a lot of volume. At tight end, we both really like Jared Cook after what he did on Monday night, and looking at his matchup this week with the Broncos. What about at quarterback? Do you see anybody that stands out at quarterback to you?
Those low-end quarterbacks this week have really shootout potential matches in Tyrod and Trubisky. Both looked all right last week, so we'll see what they bring Week 2. Trubisky's interesting, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. So that's daily fantasy stuff, and we'll get deeper into each one of these guys that we just mentioned throughout this episode as we go through each game and highlight good matchups, bad matchups, and whatnot. So I'm going to get us kicked off, and I'm going to start with the Chiefs at Steelers. Patrick Mahomes last week, 4 touchdowns. Yeah, 2 of them were on these weird pitches and whatnot. So doesn't matter to us though, right? A touchdown's a touchdown. I want to see another week or two before I name him a matchup-proof quarterback one.
Deshaun Watson 2.0, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's one game, so let's not go too crazy here. The one matchup that I saw that stood out to me was Kelsey. Last week, the Steelers held Njoku to 3 catches on 7 targets. Yeah, he dropped 2 of them, but we talked a lot about Njoku's talent and what he could end up being with the Browns. So I would, and the Steelers last year they gave up the 3rd fewest amount of points to tight end. So I wouldn't freak out if after this week you saw another bad game from Travis Kelce, 2 bad games in a row. I can see people starting to worry about him, but don't worry about him. He just, it was a weird game last week, and it's a bad matchup this week. So don't be scared off. You're going to start Kareem Hunt. You're going to start Tyreek Hill. He looked crazy. He had those 3 touchdowns, one of them being a return touchdown.
Those were wild. He's an athletic freak.
He's crazy, dude. So fast. The peace sign is like the coolest thing in football since Dion putting the hand behind.
I can't believe you even skipped the man from the same team in the X Factor, tossing the X up every time he took the kickoff back to the house. Devontae Hall.
The quarterbacks, we already mentioned Mahomes, but I see big games from Big Ben and Antonio Brown this week. Last week, the Chiefs allowed 424 yards to Phillip Rivers, and Keenan Allen had 108 of them. So I see another, big performance from Big Ben and Antonio Brown there. Juju should have another good game. He was second in targets last week for the Steelers. He should be second in targets every week until Le'Veon comes back, hopefully if he does. And that brings up James Conner. Obviously, if Le'Veon's not active, you're playing James Conner every week because the dude's going to get the volume every week, and he showed last week that he can definitely handle it. So let's move over to the next game, which would be the Panthers at Falcons. What do you got for that?
So this game this week is a scare me off game. Now, normally I'd be very, very excited. The reason, though, is, again, early on, it just looks sloppy from both teams. Cam, I don't even think we really know if Cam can throw the football at this point. We've seen a few options, but year to year, it's the same thing. We're all excited, and you can't ever take a receiver from him except for Greg Olsen, who's now out.
Yeah.
So the one to watch is definitely Devin Funchess. That's the only thing I can imagine who's getting those extra targets except for McCaffrey. Now, McCaffrey in this game, these are guys I'm saying in terms of McCaffrey at least. You're starting him if you have him, but I think this week you'll be pleasantly surprised that maybe just off receptions and volume, he's going to have a good week.
Last year the Falcons allowed the most receptions to running backs and the second most receiving yards to running backs, and McCaffrey is probably the most dangerous pass-catching running back there is.
And if we saw anything last week, too, it's that, eventually you can punch the Falcons right in the mouth with the running back. So that's why I'm really interested to see is if they start to try and have like a sledgehammer option. Right now I don't know who they would have punched that thing like J.J. last week to open it up for the pass and everything. But you know what? We'll see. It's going to be an interesting game.
Maybe it's Cam. Maybe they just run straight power with Cam.
I would just like to see him play quarterback for an entire game once, just from fantasy purposes. But let's switch to the other side of the ball. Matt Ryan this week, I think that he's going to want to come out and try and prove something. It's not, it's not an ideal matchup, but it's also not the Panthers' defense of years past. They can be thrown on, they can be attacked, and I think we're going to see a little bit of a vengeance between Matt Ryan and Julio Jones this week. Obviously you're going to pencil them in. Maybe not Ryan if you have another quarterback, but I would consider it. From a running back standpoint for the Falcons, listen, Luke Kuechly, that kid's an animal.
Yeah.
Their defense, I know he got a little bit banged up last week, but if he's in there, either one might have a tough game, especially after week 1 as well between Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman. I'm a little nervous because I don't know if you can truly pick which one to put your faith in at this point.
Yeah, the Panthers last year gave up the 3rd fewest amount of points to running backs. That's definitely the strength of their defense. Is the run defense. Last week they held Zeke to under 5 yards per carry, which is an accomplishment because that dude's a beast. Is it you got anything else for that game?
No, not at all. Let's move away from this one.
Yeah,
let's stay away.
The next one I got is Ravens at Bengals. The one thing I want to say regarding the Ravens is please stop with these fullback dives to Buck Allen. Did you see that they did it again?
I can't even believe Buck Allen still sees the field.
Dude, I don't know how many times they did it last year, and then they come out this, and I know Collins fumbled, but like how can that be a top of the chart goal line play call to go with? Like, it's just so stupid. You got Collins, give him the ball on the goal line and let him punch it in. They have a good offensive line. So I like both running backs in this game, actually. Mixon last week, he had 22 touches and had about 150 total yards. So
I think Joe Mixon this year is here to show you that his name should belong in the conversation with the other running backs from that class, most of which are going at the went at the top end of these drafts.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of the draft next year, like who of these late for top one RB1 guys are going to eventually make the jump up to like the top tier RB1s, and I agree. I think Mixon's going to be one of them for sure. The Ravens defense last week absolutely dominated Buffalo. They were horrible in every part of the game. So
who didn't see that one coming except for Buffalo?
I don't see them having as big of a game against Cincinnati. So I think the Ravens are going to be in a much more normal game script. So hopefully Collins can get some more carries than he did last week. He only got 7 carries. They were blowing him out. He had that fumble, so I think they kind of took him off the field. But with Kenneth Dixon now on IR, it's just Collins and Buck Allen. So the one thing that does kind of scare me with looking at Collins' potential volume is, like I said, those stupid goal line Buck Allen fullback dives, and also the fact that the Bengals were in the top 10 in receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. That's another Buck Allen's another one of those big pass catching running backs that hopefully he doesn't take away too much from Collins. I don't see every one of the Ravens receivers scoring a touchdown again like they did last week. The Bengals were actually really good against wide receivers last year, so I don't really feel all that great about any one of them. I think the one, I said it last week, if you are going to hitch your wagon to one of those Ravens receivers, for me it would be Michael Crabtree because of the red zone targets that I think you'll see over the other two guys. And obviously A.J. Green you're going to start. He's a beast. But especially this week, you might look at that matchup with the Ravens and get kind of scared of it. But Sean Smith is still out on suspension, and he's that shutdown corner on that team that would normally be taking away number one receiver. So, you shouldn't be worried about A.J. Green at all. I don't like these Bengals tight ends. The Ravens only allowed one catch to Bills tight ends last week, and that was in that massive blowout where they were throwing the ball a lot more than they normally would. So tight ends against the Bengals or against the Ravens this year, I don't see being a very good matchup. Why don't we move over to your Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles playing the Buccaneers of Tampa Bay?
Well, let me start out by saying, who in God's green earth? Actually, I saw that there were people in Daily Fantasy, God bless them, that went Ryan Fitzpatrick.
That played Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Good God. Where did that come from?
Dude, those had to have been just like random dart throw.
You know what? I honestly can't even tell you I saw him on the list. He was so far down. But all right, let's move past that. Let's refocus that to this week. Now, make no mistake about it. The Saints defense was hyped up and they came out flat. We'll see what remains from there. But for this game, whose defense did not come out flat, remained respected with the hype, and arguably looked a little bit better than last year. That would be the Philadelphia Eagles, your Super Bowl 52 champions.
That defensive line looked just as dominant as they did all season, and they're Julio beat him up, but that's what Julio Jones does. So
bend but don't break.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I've never seen a defensive lineman of 300 plus pounds like Fletcher Cox play that RPO so fantastic. I mean, he was waiting 10 yards back and just feasting. So with that in mind, the one thing I will tell you though with the Buccaneers team is unless they're hitting Fitzpatrick, which there's a good chance that D-line's gonna, the Buccaneers are not gonna try and run the ball. I mean they might, but I really think they're gonna just try and let Fitzpatrick play his veteran status and just move the ball up and down the field and get to the red zone and not score. So they're gonna start shooting from 40 yards out to Mike Evans or Godwin. So I do think in this game you're gonna see some big plays and some big fantasy potential. but it might not be from the people you necessarily expect. Mike Evans, you're starting him. I mean, he's going to get his targets. He's going to get his catches. But he's not necessarily going to get his touchdowns. We saw Julio pretty much, he did work, but he just got yards and receptions.
Yeah, he didn't get any touchdowns, which is kind of his
MO the past few years.
Yeah, so
we'll see with Mike Evans. But the guy I'm looking at from this Buccaneer squad this week is Chris Godwin.
Yep.
Godwin is going to be, I really like watching Sidney Jones play, so that's going to be a fun matchup to witness. But I think Godwin's going to be the target in the end zone for this team.
Yeah, and with Deshaun Jackson dealing with that concussion,
he's going to get his chance.
Yeah.
I don't think the Buccaneers score more than maybe 14 points, but we'll see what happens. Yeah. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick's going to find himself on the ground more often than not. I
think the one matchup in the Buccaneers' favor is the tight end against the Eagles last year. They were 18th, so middle of the pack. That might be the matchup that the Buccaneers try and target. They have two serviceable tight ends, and one of them's O.J. Howard, and they're super high on him. So that might be one matchup to look at in that game.
Oh, 100%. I mean, they're going to try and move the ball. They're going to have to, because I think this Eagles team, they're going to come out against the Buccaneers. Buccaneers played the run really well last week. They really did. I know Kamara did his thing, but most of that was through. I mean, Kamara's a stud. He caught a lot of passes and made a lot of moves that way. But the Eagles' run game is a little different. They're not as finesse. They can. I could see J.J. maybe getting stopped short. Gerald McCoy is a really good football player. Mm-hmm. But that running back squad, I could see maybe a Darren Sproles having a big game, coming out, catching passes. I think they're going to look to have Nick move the ball more, get him into a comfortable zone. And I'll tell you what, if I had Nelson Aguilar, I'd be pretty excited about the amount of volume he's about to get this week.
Yeah.
Well, no, one question for you is, what do you think about Zach Ertz? Low output last week. It's the matchups there.
Yeah, so, really, the matchup's not there, actually. The Buccaneers gave up the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends last week, or to the tight ends last year. Zach Ertz is matchup proof in my opinion. I would feel comfortable playing him against the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends in a row. Like he's their number one guy in the passing game there. So I wouldn't be too worried about him at all.
See, in terms of that tight end defense, though, the one thing that gets me with that is that some of these guys have morphed into such a unique style. That that's the one position where, in all aspects, I have the hardest time judging because it's so different. Whereas last year we had 3 guys that could do this, and now there's 10.
Right.
And like you said, the reason I like Zach Ertz is when you're running these 3 receiver sets and Aguilar's coming across the middle. I think Zach Ertz is going to be open, and I think he's going to have a big game. I really do. I think that's how they're going to get Nick Foles moving. It's through Ertz.
It's through the tight end.
Yep.
Yeah, and they got Goddard too, so they can run the 2 tight end sets that they loved doing last year. Let's move on to the next game we got here. Dolphins at my New York Football Jets. These 2 teams had weird games in Week 1. It's hard to kind of get make a good judgment of where those 2 teams are at based off of what they did last week because, the Dolphins had that weird game against Tennessee where there was the 2 long rain delays and, the game started at 1 and end till 8 and it was just a strange game for sure. And the Jets had probably the best game they've had in years, especially on defense with that and special teams, with the return and all the interceptions and whatnot. So, having said that, Darnold looked great. Crowell looked great. He had that one long 62-yard touchdown run, which definitely inflated his stats a little bit. But, he only had 10 attempts. The one guy that stood out to me, like we were talking earlier with DFS, is Quincy Enunwa. He had 10 targets, caught 6 of them for 63 yards, had the touchdown. Looked like Quincy Enunwa looked like 2 years ago when he came in with the Jets and looked great. So I really like him for this game. I look at the Dolphins running backs. Last week, Drake had 14 carries to Gore's 9. So that's essentially a 60-40 split. And Gore had more yardage than Drake did. Gore had 61 yards to Drake's 48. So I don't know what to really make of that. I know Gore had the one nice long run, but that's how I see the split going there every week. Is 60-40, maybe 65 to 70, 30. It's always going to be in favor of Drake most likely, but Gore's always going to be there to take that chunk out of the workload there for me to not like Drake. I wouldn't. That's why I stayed away from him when I drafted. I probably wouldn't really add him into any of my DFS lineups throughout the season unless Gore's out. And plus, the Jets' run D looked really good last week in the beginning part of the game when the Lions were actually trying to run the ball. They held the three Lions running backs to a total of 70 yards, and that's a team that they used those running backs in the pass game. So they were involved throughout the entire game, and they shut them down. So I like how the Jets' run D looked. So again, I'm staying away from Drake. The receiver I like on the Dolphins side of the game is definitely Kenny Stills. Obviously, he had those 2 touchdowns, the red zone targets, but he only had 5 targets on the game. Yeah, he had 106 yards. He turned 4 catches into 106 yards. I want to see more targets from a guy like that before I want to pencil him in as a solid number 2 receiver or a flex play. So. That's it for that game for me. You got anything you want to throw in for that game?
I think you pretty well covered it. I do want to put one statement out there. I have hated Frank Gore since, God, he started just busting on every rookie running back that you ever wanted that was low round. I mean, Indiana, we were hoping maybe last year Marlon Mack, Frank Gore, Kenyon Drake, Frank Gore. You could dig further and Frank Gore.
It's just always there.
He's the ultimate vulture. Because he doesn't just vulture touchdowns. He vultures everything. He's like 35 and still doing it. Bothers me.
But he's great, man.
Hey, good for him.
The next game is a big one, I think. Vikings at the Green Bay Packers. We saw Aaron Rodgers come back and have a Hall of Fame type game, coming back and coming out of being carted off the field and coming out and winning the game with 3 touchdown passes.
I don't even think Aaron Rodgers knew what he did when he came back out. Anybody that watched his press conference after or saw his eyes, my man was not on planet Earth. But that's all right, because he did not play like he was from planet Earth towards the end of that game.
I just really hope that the Packers, look at what happened and try and, I'm not saying contain him, but try and keep him from doing all the craziness that he does as far as escaping the pocket. And I mean, that's what makes him great, but you got to keep him healthy throughout the whole season, and he plays reckless to me. He's like,
every year he goes down, or
something
occurs to this team every single year, whether it's one of the receivers or him. It always occurs.
Yeah. The one thing I saw from this game, not a very good matchup for either of the tight ends. The Vikings gave up the least amount of points to tight ends last year, and the Packers gave up the 6th fewest. So I don't see Kyle Rudolph or Jimmy Graham really having all that great of a game.
You know what? I know the hype behind Jimmy Graham, but if you just look at seasons past with Aaron Rodgers, the name of the tight end does not matter. That tight end is factored in when Rodgers wants him to be, which is generally within 20 yards of the end zone. And it doesn't need to be the number 1. So I shied away from Jimmy Graham. I thought it was a little overhyped for a guy that doesn't. Rodgers is not. I mean, he's so many receivers. He's just so good that he doesn't need that blanket. So I'm staying away from him too. The Vikings are they're gonna come out to play. But I got a name for you. I already said it in this one. Geronimo Allison.
Oh yeah, Geronimo.
Someone's gonna move that ball. I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers. I know the Vikings defense is nasty, no question, but so is Aaron Rodgers.
And Devontae Adams is dealing with a little bit of an injury.
It's been undisclosed. He came out with a very weird statement today saying that the adrenaline carried him through. But you know what? Regardless, you never want to hear that your number 1 receiver is playing through some injuries right now, going into the defense like the Vikings.
Yeah. The one thing that could be good for the Packers, could be favorable for them, is the Vikings may be out 2 of their cornerbacks. They're starting corner on the other side of Xavier Rhodes. Trey Waynes might be out. He's got a knee injury. I think he practiced today on Tuesday, but he may miss. And they have another corner, Mackenzie Alexander, that's got an ankle injury, and he may miss. So if the Vikings are down 2 cornerbacks, maybe that pass defense isn't as
ferocious.
Yeah,
but
good word for it.
I think even if one of those 2 plays, I think that you're safe with one of the. Look, you have to start Devontae Adams if you have him. I get that, but that's why I think Randall Cobb or Geronimo Allison, Aaron Rodgers is going to find that open guy, even if it's a sliver.
One thing for the Vikings, the Packers were in the top 10 the top 5 and 6 in receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. So look for Cooks to get a decent amount of targets like he did last week. Last week he got 7 targets. Might see even more than that this week. So that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to Cooks. Moving on to our next game here is the Chargers playing the Bills. This is probably the easiest game to do. Just if you have any Chargers, figure out a way to get them into your lineup. Most likely, even Antonio Gates and Austin Eckler, even those guys that aren't the studs, their matchups are so good that it probably doesn't even matter. You got to get them in there. They're probably going to have another huge game against Buffalo.
With the way those tight ends got hurt this week and whatnot, you know what? If Gates is on the field, he's always going to be a red zone threat because of the connection him and Phillip Rivers have.
Exactly.
It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
There's going to be weeks he gets nothing because he is touchdown dependent, but he's going to get them.
Yeah. McCoy last week, this game was to me, the microcosm of how I saw this season going for the Bills and going for LaShawn McCoy. They were in a horrible game script in the first quarter of the game. LaShawn McCoy finished the game with 7 attempts and 1 target, which he caught for a -1 yard. He finished with 22 or 21 total yards. Kelvin Benjamin had 7 targets, caught 1 of them. Charles Clay didn't catch a pass.
Just stay away.
Yeah.
Shady can't even be thinking about football at this point, right? So,
and maybe with the announcement of Josh Allen being the starting quarterback for this week for the Bills, maybe that, they put some new, interesting, fun trick plays and stuff in there to spice it up a little bit. But, it's just they have no one there except for McCoy and Kelvin Benjamin and Charles Clay. It's not a bad nucleus of playmakers, but you got to have other receivers to go along with Kelvin Benjamin. You got to have an offensive lineman to help out McCoy. He's getting older. He's not as explosive as he used to be. And I just see this offense being just as putrid as they were in week 1 every week for the whole season.
It almost makes you wonder what the Bills have been doing in the draft for the past 5 years. To see this roster, you scratch your head and say, well, were you there?
Yeah.
Were you in attendance?
And they made the playoffs last year for the first time in whatever it was, 100 years. That's exaggeration, but and you go from a playoff team to this. It's how do you let that happen? How do you?
I think they undervalued how important Tyrod was to that team.
They definitely did.
Because if you ever look at Tyrod's stats with running backs, it's actually outrageous. The difference for Shady with Tyrod and without is enormous.
Yeah, we talked about that in the running backs episode of how much value, how much of an increase in value you see in a running back when he has a quarterback that's mobile and athletic that can run the ball and that has that threat against the defense every week. Again, obviously, start all the Chargers. Phillip Rivers, Melvin Gordon, Keenan Allen. They all should have huge games. Let's do one more game and then let's take a break so I can go grab another beer. And so what do we got? We got Browns at Saints, right?
Oh yeah. So this week, I think this is the week of Tyrod Taylor. He came out last week in a conference rival. You know what? He did fine. I wish I'd have had more of him. Yeah, I think Tyrod is going to be a relatively competent quarterback there until it's time for the Baker show. And his game is going to be a shootout. They're going to be chucking it. When you play Drew Brees, you pretty much, that's what happens.
You have to outscore him.
You have to score with him.
Last year he did see a huge downtick in his production because the Saints, focused on running the ball so much. But he showed last week with Michael Thomas that when he wants to get into shotgun, put his back foot down, and fire away, that he can still do it.
And even running the ball, I mean, from a point standpoint, they do it so quickly. Like Alvin Kamara is explosive.
Yeah.
So it's almost just as much of it's the same type of threat. So I think the Browns are really going to have to stay and keep pace. That ball's going to have to be in the air. And after last week, I mean, why wouldn't you try?
The one matchup I see not in the Browns' favor in the passing game is that tight end position. The Saints gave up the fourth fewest points to tight ends last year. And Njoku he came off the field with an undisclosed injury, and he was able to get back on the field, but it seems like he's been kind of slowed down a little bit in practice, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, the Browns receivers, they could have another big game if you look at what the Buccaneers guys were able to do against the Saints last week.
And even if that was an aberration and the Saints defense does play a little better, just in terms of volume, I think you're good. I think you're good with the receivers because I agree. I think Njoku, it's just not going to be there.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, like I said, we're gonna take a quick breather here, and when we get back, we'll finish going through the rest of the game. So stay tuned, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Thanks for coming back with us. I was so excited to get another beer that we forgot to run through the Saints offense, and it's pretty easy. If you have a Saints player on your roster, you should start him, unless it's Cameron Meredith, who may miss another week. We'll see whether he's active come game time, but Michael Thomas, he had that massive game last week, and he should have another good game. Alvin Kamara is Alvin Kamara. He's probably one of the most explosive players in the NFL, so if you have him, obviously you're going to start him too. And Drew Brees is Drew Brees, so start him.
Quick caveat on that Saints team real quick.
Sure.
Everyone's buying into the hype of Ted Ginn. Listen, I get it, and I could be wrong this week. He might do it again. He's not doing that every game. It happened last year, too. He'd come out 2 touchdowns one game and not a catch the next.
He's the prototypical deep threat
Boom or
guy.
bust.
Yeah.
Boom or bust. Remember that before you drop your sleeper pick for Ted Ginn.
He
Boom
might,
or bust.
He might be one of the those boom or bust guys that throughout the season could see enough workload where he's brought into that wide receiver 2 every week type of player, but I don't see it happening
It's
here.
too dependent on Cam Meredith picking up the offense for me to want to jump this early.
Yeah.
Unless you're planning on getting rid of him next week after the game, which all right, then good move for you. But let's move forward here.
Yeah. Next game is Texans at Titans. I see a bounce back game from Deshaun Watson. He was not happy with himself and with his performance in Week 1. Yeah, it was against the Patriots. It's tough playing in New England Week 1. Like that's
with one offensive weapon.
Yeah. I mean, being down Fuller, you could tell. Definitely
it's huge. It's huge for that team.
Obviously, you're starting Hopkins. I like Lamar Miller again because of the volume. Hopefully this week we don't see Alfred Blue come in and just vulture up a goal line carry like that. But hopefully it was just game flow. He happened to be on the field when they were down in there, and they didn't want to sub in or whatever. Hopefully those goal line carries throughout the season go to Lamar Miller. Last week, what do I got here? So the Titans allowed over 4.5 yards per carry to Dolphins running backs last week. We were, a couple of games ago, we were talking Kenyon Drake and Frank Gore. So it should be a normal, decent game for Lamar Miller with the volume and with what the Titans are allowing against running backs. Hopefully Lamar Miller can have a decent game for you. I am worried about these Titan wide receivers if Blaine Gabbert is playing quarterback for him because, Blaine Gabbert.
You just got to say his name, and that's enough. It's Blaine Gabbert.
Yeah. For people that are new to fantasy football out there, Blaine Gabbert is probably the last person. Besides Nathan Peterman, Blaine Gabbert's probably the last person you want playing quarterback for your fantasy team. But with that said, if Mariota is able to play, I like Corey Davis again. We mentioned him in the DFS section. He got 13 targets last week. Had a decent game considering his workload. And you look at the other wide receivers on that team, they're just. It seems like Corey Davis is the guy. So, if you have him, you should feel pretty decent about at least the workload that he should get. Like I was saying with the Dolphins-Jets matchup, the Dolphins were playing the Titans. It was a weird game. I don't know how much to make of the carry split between Derrick Henry and Dion Lewis, but Derrick Henry only got 10 carries for 26 yards, and he only got that one target, which he turned into 5 yards, whereas Dion Lewis had 16 attempts. He got 75 yards plus caught 5 of 8 targets for 35 yards. He had that touchdown, so I don't know if, I wouldn't be too scared off from Derrick Henry. I still think he's going to be the guy that leads that team in carries by the end of the season, but definitely not the most encouraging game for him. But again, game script, the Titans were down. Mariota threw those 2 interceptions back-to-back, even though there was hours in between them. And then Blaine Gabbert came in and was Blaine Gabbert. So Titans weren't really able to get the run game going. So hopefully this week we see some more run for Derrick Henry. And again, hopefully Fuller is healthy this week so we can see Deshaun Watson in his complete, with his full complement of receivers, because I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league because of his threat running the ball, and I've mentioned it a couple times, that deep threat between him and Fuller I think is top in the league. So why don't we move on to the next game, Lions at 49ers.
Real quick before we hit that, one name to look out for in that Titans game is Jonnu Smith. Whether you wanted to look out for him or now have to look out for him, like myself, who a Delaney owner. Jonnu Smith, just a quick update for everyone that might be new or had Delaney, is a very athletic, albeit smaller, tight end, but very athletic. Second season, he could end up with that volume. Obviously, like you said, this Titans team right now, it's tough to see their passing game and what it could become. But he's definitely an option if Delaney went down for you. Jonnu Smith.
I feel like we've just been waiting so long for these Titan receivers. For the past couple of years, they've been adding another, top wide receiver coming out of the draft, and we've just been waiting for them to come together for Mariota, and it just hasn't happened yet.
In the end, somehow it's going to be Rashard Matthews as their leading receiver again.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned, let's stay on this real quick, actually. So you mentioned you have Delaney Walker in one of your leagues.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do this past week with the waiver wire to fix that problem?
So, I was very excited to get...
How many teams in this league that you had in?
So the league I have Delaney, there are 12 teams. It's a redraft league. I mean, it's as standard as you can get. Now it's half-point PPR, so it's not a full... It's that weird sweet spot in the middle. And what happened was, first off, I got Delaney late, and I was very excited because every year he gets a lot of volume. And with that in mind, I looked at the waiver wire this week.
Was he the only tight end you were rostering in that league?
Yep.
Okay.
Only tight end. All the tight ends in terms of those random guys that killed it this week were there. And the reason I went Jonnu Smith, actually, I like his matchup. He's the guy there at tight end. That's not a question. The volume, we'll see. They do throw the ball to the tight end a lot. I don't think that changes, especially with those receiver questions. And I chose him over the kid from Seattle who had a big game, mainly because that big game, it was one game. Was Jared Cook or Jared Cook wasn't available? So this year tight ends went at a premium. I mean, across the board, because there are so many better tight ends.
What about George Kittle? Was he there?
Kittle's gone.
Okay.
It's a very advanced league. Guys have been doing it for a long time. And with the way the teams are passing to the tight ends, this is the first year I've seen where most people are rostering two.
Okay.
Now, with that in mind, I didn't think I needed to with Delaney, mainly because it's Delaney. So I went Jonnu Smith with the same theory of a James Conner, a TJ Yeldon. Jonnu Smith is the tight end.
Right.
Again, the guy in Seattle, that was a good game, but they have some other people there. He came out of nowhere. It wasn't because of an injury to him or anything. And sometimes, he could be better in the long run. But for week 2, I want to know my guy is going to be the guy on the field.
Okay.
So
are you if Mariota, if it comes out Mariota's not playing, are you gonna keep playing him?
I'm going to keep Jonnu Smith extra hard if Mariota's not playing, because Blaine Gabbert has a very severe lack of talent, and in those situations even more, they look for a security blanket. And the less talent, the more likely that blanket is the big, athletic tight end.
Yeah, I'm hoping these, if Mariota does miss, I'm hoping these running backs see a big upswing in workload.
I think if Mariota's out, Deion Lewis is the play. Mm-hmm. Again, security blanket, easy target.
Yeah, well, like you said, Smith's got a good matchup this week. Texans gave up the 10th most points to tight ends last year, and yeah, it was Gronk, but they let Gronk eat. They let Gronk be Gronk last week, so it's not a bad matchup at all. So let's jump into Lions and 49ers.
Okay, well each team last week, I would say, came out, and you couldn't have expected much from the Niners against that Minnesota defense, right? Week 1, Jimmy G, a little rusty. One thing to be on the lookout right off the bat from this game, this came out today. Goodwin, Marquise Goodwin, did not practice today. Mm-hmm. This injury, these undisclosed injuries where they kind of keep it vague and just keep them out randomly, they worry me big time.
Yep.
I know last year Jimmy G and him had the connection. We didn't see any of that on last week. I know he got hurt, but without having to witness that, you can't confidently start Goodwin whether he's healthy or not right now.
I think I saw that it was like a deep bone bruise or
something
a deep
weird
tissue bruise.
That it's just like,
it's nothing broken,
nothing serious.
Yeah, it doesn't look like anything serious.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, we'll have to definitely keep an eye on him. See if he's active come game time.
Yeah, 100%. What do you, what I'm really interested in hearing, obviously we'll talk the quarterbacks, but the running backs in this game, is there anybody that you particularly like?
So both teams last year were in the top 10 for most fantasy points allowed to running backs. Mm-hmm. So
that's why I had to ask the question, because you look at these teams and it's a dart throw.
But exactly, you don't know, and this is why the Lions were one of the teams I stayed away from on 100%. Draft day, was because I hate, you see this and you go, oh, this is a good matchup for him, but who the hell are you going to start? And yeah, it did get a little easier with LeGarrette Blount going down. I didn't see, what that injury is looking like for the rest of the season, but so it does limit it to just Carry On and Theo Riddick. So
we've yet to see them run a normal running back, it's just
with the game script that they were in with the Jets last week. You couldn't really get a good grasp of what that run game's going to look like. I know their new head coach Patricia wants to focus on running the football, but they obviously didn't have the chance to try and do that last week. So maybe they come out with that as the main focus, and they try and establish that against the 49ers and say, Matthew Stafford, take it off for a couple drives so we don't throw the game away again. But I look for Matthew Stafford to actually have a bounce back game after the horrible game that he had against my Jets. And then the other matchup that I'm excited about is George Kittle. And in one of my leagues, I had the other tight end that went down this week, Greg Olsen, and that was just it's a 10-team standard league, so I was able to replace him with George Kittle. So I'm excited about George Kittle this week against the Lions. You got anything else for that game?
No, I think that game is like you said. I think that Stafford's going to come out and really try and throw that ball.
Yeah. At least Lions wide receivers. We were talking a little bit before, actually, about how that split may work out throughout the season. Seeing Marvin Jones stretching the field as the deep threat, seeing Golden Tate being that possession receiver that he's been for the past 3 or 4 years with the Lions, and Kenny Golladay is kind of the dark horse that we're not sure exactly where he's going to fall in line with the target share and whatnot, but.
Look, they drafted this kid the other year for a reason. They want him. They like him, and he's going to have the opportunity.
And we've definitely seen Marvin Jones have some of his I don't want to say worst games, but
he's streaky.
Yeah, and in the games that Galladay played were not Marvin Jones' best games. So that's something to consider when looking at Marvin Jones, and that's one of the reasons why. When we were going through the draft, I noticed in a lot of mocks and in a lot of the drafts that I was a part of, that was one of those wide receiver groups that they had, two guys from the same team pretty much going back to back or within 2 or 3 picks of each other. And I will take Golden Tate over Marvin Jones every time.
Every time,
especially in a PPR league. So let's go on to Raiders at Broncos. Poor Raiders, man. They get stuck with 2 horrible matchups for quarterbacks and wide receivers back-to-back weeks. Amari Cooper did not have a good game last week. He was shadowed by Aqib Talib at first in the beginning, and then when Jared Cook started killing him, they moved Aqib to Jared Cook, and Amari still didn't really do anything. So it's going to be interesting this week to see whether Chris Harris, the Pro Bowl corner with the Broncos, whether he shadows Amari Cooper or if he just plays to one side, or what they do, whether or not the Raiders want to put Cooper in the slot and move him around. So that's one of those matchups that I'm definitely going to be looking forward to. And Amari Cooper may be a guy to target for a buy low after this week. If you look at this matchup, it's not that great. If he comes out and has another bad game, and Amari Cooper owners may be frustrated, especially after seeing what he did to him last year. He had that one massive Thursday night game against the Chiefs, but he was so inconsistent last year. I could see people getting super frustrated with Amari Cooper. After this week, may be a good time to throw some trades out at the Amari Cooper owners out there. The tight ends in this game, they both have pretty good matchups. Broncos gave up the second most, and Raiders gave up the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends last year. So, maybe we see a breakout game for Jake Butt. We were talking about him coming into the season.
I hope so.
He's
great.
Got
some talent.
Yeah, missed out his whole rookie season, so maybe he can come out. And then Jared Cook, as we mentioned, had that massive game last week. He caught 9 of 12 targets at 180 yards. So he's got another great matchup this week. I'm sure a lot of the Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen owners out there were really looking to add Jared Cook if he was available. I don't really like any of the Oakland running backs in this game, specifically just because of the touch distribution that we're most likely going to see every single week, and plus the Broncos gave up the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs last year. Last week was last week. I won't really look. Week 1 is such a strange week, especially in fantasy football, to try and get a grasp on what trends could come of it and who played bad, who played good. It's so hard to judge off of the first week of the season. But yeah, like I said, I'm not really crazy on any of the Raider running backs. Are you excited about maybe Jalen Richard? Maybe if the Broncos defense gives them the same looks that the Rams defense gave them, and they decide they just want to work the middle of the field with Jared Cook and Jalen Richard again. Maybe in a PPR league, Jalen Richard is worth a flyer. Maybe in DFS, maybe he's a guy we missed.
I'm staying as far away from each backfield, both sides of this ball, as I can.
I agree.
But there is one player on the Raiders that I'm going to keep an eye on that wasn't mentioned yet. Just recently brought back Martavis Bryant.
Yeah.
That pass attack looked weak. It looks like they could use someone like him. Who knows what Martavis is at this point? Not many players are Josh Gordon and can come back and kill it each and every time. But you know what? He's buy low. He's on everybody's waiver wire right now. If you have somebody that's out and you couldn't find anyone to pick up, why not take the flyer on this kid? Maybe he comes out and does really well. Maybe you get rid of him.
Yeah. The Broncos, this offense I can see being a puzzle throughout the season. They gave Phillip Lindsay, undrafted rookie free agent. Him and Freeman had the exact same rushing stat line. They both had 15 attempts for 71 yards. Lindsay did a lot more in the passing game, had that touchdown. We were worried coming into the season about the possibility of a split between Freeman and Booker, but now it seems like it's really the split that we got to worry about is Freeman and Lindsay. Definitely discouraging for Freeman owners who maybe took him expecting him to be that standout rookie running back who probably was coming in with one of the best situations among the rookie running backs. What did you think about that Phillip Lindsay big game?
I think it's one of those situations where you just gotta hold on to your running back and wait. I will put this out there though: the Broncos have done the same exact thing every single year since they got rid of Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey. That is a team that they will stick me back there to run because their runs. It doesn't seem to matter who is the front office,
who the head coach
they had
is.
Tatum Bell run for 1,000. You could just go through the list.
Monte Ball was in there.
Right. It's just unbelievable. I mean, CJ, every one of their guys at one point, you're like, oh, man, let me get him. Let me get him. And even I bought back into it this year, and I knew I shouldn't have done it because it's the same thing every year. I mean, you might get lucky with the CJ Anderson for a year, but then the people that tried to get him the following year, look what happened.
Yeah,
it's
I had
tough to gauge.
I had quite a few DFS rosters this past week with Royce Freeman, and I was pretty upset when I saw that, they gave the same amount of – they gave more work to Phillip Lindsay, actually, because he did more in the passing game. Definitely frustrating.
That's why you don't buy into the preseason hype. You have to witness it for yourself.
Yeah, he was, I think, probably one of only a handful of players that had a touchdown in every single preseason game. Like, if you went off of preseason, the guy would have been a first-round pick. But let's go to the Cardinals at the Rams. This is an interesting game to me for a couple of reasons. Patrick Peterson apparently this season won't be sticking to the other team's number one receiver. They're apparently going to either just keep him on one side or move him around. But I'm not buying into that, especially this week, and especially after what we saw Brandon Cooks do to the Raiders defense. I forget what the show's called, but on NFL Network I was watching Deion Sanders, who is my probably favorite football player of all time, Deion, he's the man. And he was basically saying how cornerbacks in this league, they play to not get beat. Very few of them are aggressive and play to make plays. A lot of them are just playing not to get beat. And you saw Brandon Cooks draw, I think it was 3 huge pass interference calls.
Right.
To me, I think the Cardinals are going to see that and go, we need to put a corner on him that we know is not going to grab and not going to pull and tug on him when the guy runs past him, because we all know that Patrick Peterson has the closing speed to compete with any wide receiver in the league. So I could see him kind of shutting down Brandon Cooks. I'm lowest on Brandon Cooks. You saw the target distribution between those 3 Rams receivers last week, where they all pretty much had 8 targets. I think one had 7, one had 8, one had 9. But their roles were pretty solidified. Cooper Kupp is that possession red zone guy. Brandon Cooks is the deep threat, and Robert Woods is the in between.
Right.
Whatever you need him to do. So I like David Johnson to also have a bounce back game this week. The Rams last year gave up the fourth most fantasy points to running backs. It seems like the Rams were completely content last year with just letting teams run the ball down the field, and then when they got into the red zone, shutting them down. So I can see David Johnson having a pretty good game. I would sit Fitz this week. We saw what that tandem of cornerbacks can do. I think that tandem of Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters is right up there with the A.J. Boye, Jalen Ramsey combination in Jacksonville. Those are where your fantasy wide receivers go to die for a week. I would stay away from any pass catchers on the Cardinals. How do you see this game?
I like David Johnson is, even in his bad games, still puts up points.
Yeah.
One thing that interests me with this game, though, and I figured it was going to take a bit to click, but that Rams team did. They added some hefty weight to that D line.
Yeah.
We didn't see it really function well last week, but sometimes it takes a little bit, and at some point that they could really be firing. But I really think David Johnson, I don't think that's going to matter this week. That being said, David Johnson's use is going to come strictly down to the fact that can the Cardinals keep the Rams from blowing them out
Yep.
right out of the water? And even if that occurs, David Johnson instantly becomes a very good option for PPR receptions, because I could see the Rams, like you said, just pulling Fitzgerald out. Once you take care of him, who are they throwing the ball to?
Right.
Seals Jones?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the only quote unquote good matchup in this game is Seals Jones. You see what Jared Cook, maybe maybe John Gruden and the Raiders showed the way that you attack the Rams defense, because they like you said, they have that massive defensive line just filled with Pro Bowlers and first round picks. They have like I said, probably the number 1 or number 2 tandem of cornerbacks, and they got great safeties too. So that defense I see being the Jacksonville defense of last year, where they just straight up dominate people.
100%. 100%. And guess what? Seals Jones is probably there on the waiver wire. It's another good guy. If someone's hurt and there are people there that you wanted and were scooped, I would go Seals Jones. He's gonna have a chance.
If you're the Greg Olson or the Delaney Walker owner, and you were picking second in the waiver wire among those two owners, I can see Seals Jones being a decent week 2 tight end replacement for you.
And Todd Gurley might have 100 points this week, by the way.
Yeah. Let's go to the Patriots at Jacksonville Jaguars, a rematch of the AFC Championship, dude. This game, I really hope. I mean, I was able to get T.J. Yeldon in one of my leagues on the waiver wire this yesterday, and but I just hope that Fournette plays, because I want to see this rematch, man. I want to see Leonard Fournette.
I know,
getting 25 carries against this Patriots defense.
I'm right there with you on that. The offenses from both teams this week actually scare me. I think that New England defense is better than people think, but it's really Bill Belichick's a genius. I mean, he's shown you time and again, and now with the receiving corps in Jacksonville, if it's not Fournette, you basically have a second string offense. Like, God, and Jacksonville's defense is great. Who are you starting confidently from that game?
Yeah. I mean, as we said last week, you go back and you look at every game that Bill Belichick has been a part of, the coaching staff, they look at who your number 1 option is on offense, who your top playmaker is, and they take him out of the game every time. DeAndre Hopkins last week, you can't really, quote unquote, take away DeAndre Hopkins, but they did as good of a job as you can.
Right.
And I see them really just focusing on stopping the run and saying, okay, Blake Bortles, go ahead and beat us with your arm. But that's the thing. Blake Bortles showed against the Bills in the playoffs last year that he knows, like, I have probably the best defense and I have an awesome run game. I don't need to take these deep shots. I don't need to take the risk. I can just – and I have the mobility and I have the legs to run for third downs, and I have the ability to move the chains with my legs. So I can see Bortles actually having a decent game, at least in the running game there against the Patriots. If Fournette is out, Yeldon is the play. That's what you do against the Patriots. You run the ball. You try and keep Tom Brady on the sideline. You try and keep Gronkowski drinking Gatorade instead of spiking the ball in the end zone.
Right.
And, after Fournette went down, Yeldon got 14 carries and he got 7 targets. He finished with a touchdown. He had about 70 total yards. So, if he's the main guy there, I can see him easily getting 20 carries. And with that awesome offensive line that they have, even with the Patriots focusing on stopping it, I still think he can be productive for you. So if you're the Fournette owner and he's out, Yeldon is a safe play for sure. The running backs on the other side of the ball, unfortunately for Jeremy Hill, but fortunately for us in the fantasy world, Jeremy Hill is out for the season with I think it's an ACL or an MCL or something like that. He got hit by his own teammate, which really sucks for him. He came in, he beat out Gillislee for that power back spot.
Right.
But at least, for us, it helps clear up that murky waters that is always the Patriots' backfield. Sony Michel missed the game. If he misses again, then they're down to just Burkhead and James White. The Jags, that's probably the only way you can beat the Jaguars' defense is running the ball.
That's it.
So I can see, Burkhead had 18 attempts last week. I can see him easily being, around 20. And my boy James White, he had 5 carries and had 9 targets. He led the Patriots in targets.
That could happen again this week too, especially with that secondary. I mean, you're gonna have to throw the ball to somebody.
And especially, like I was saying in the preseason, with Edelman out, those targets got to go somewhere. And James White is by far the most trustworthy. Besides Gronk, James White has the most trust with Tom Brady. So I like James White again. I like Burkhead because of volume. if you have to start a Patriots wide receiver, I think Dorsett showed that he's probably the more reliable.
I think it comes down to who Jalen Ramsey decides to cover. Because I could very well see him playing Dorsett as the outside speedster because Chris Hogan is, Chris Hogan.
Yeah, they mainly play Chris Hogan probably more so inside than they do outside, so he gets to avoid both Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye. But, I mean, Jared Jack's not a very good, fun cover either. If you're a skill position player, he's a beast when it comes to, coverage in the pass game as well. So we hit on Bortles. We hit on the Patriots defense, the Leonard Fournette, T.J. Yeldon situation. The Patriots receivers, as we said, the Patriots are probably going to focus on the run game of the Jags, so that should theoretically open some things up for for Jaguars receivers and tight ends. Out of the three Jaguars receivers, do you see any of them having a big game? Or
it's too much of a dart throw right now.
Yep.
It really is. There's no comfortability factor with Bortles in any of them. You saw it's painfully obvious. I'm shying away from the entire trio. No one should be in a position at this point with any one of them where you're forced to start one of those guys. In fact, there are waiver wire options I think that are a much better bet for everything fantasy. So I'm staying away.
Quincy Enunwa.
Yeah. We said Geronimo out. The guys on the waiver wire are probably a better bet this week right now than any of the receivers there. And it very well could come out as a very low scoring, just heavy hitting game. So
that league that I had Greg Olson in, I dropped D.D. Westbrook for who did I drop him for? For Quincy Enunwa, just because I feel like I like what Quincy's volume should look like throughout the season compared to what Westbrook's volume should look like throughout the season.
It's just too much of an unknown right now. Yeah. I would just shy away.
Moncrief had 5 targets. Westbrook had 6 targets. Keenan Cole had 3 catches. So, I mean, they're going to spread the ball around, and Austin Swearinger-Jenkins had that goal line look that he caught it, and then it was called back, which happened to him with the Jets probably 5 or 6 times.
Honestly, Fournette or no Fournette, the receptions are going to be to T.J. Yeldon one way or the other.
Right. Let's go to the NFC East showdown, not including your Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles.
2 of my least favorite teams.
Yeah, the Giants and the Cowboys. What do you got for this game?
So this game again, I look, these NFC East games at any time of the year are just going to be a gamble because matchups. The matchups are there, but they don't matter.
Yeah,
we've seen it time and again. Matchups do not matter in division rival games, and this is one. I think you're going to see a lot of Ezekiel Elliott. The Giants are going to try and stop him, but I think they're really going to try and get him moving.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a get-right game for Zeke and that offensive line.
And they need to somehow establish the run in order to get this passing game going. I have Michael Gallup on more teams than I'd like to admit. I'm not getting rid of him yet, but he could have just been a preseason wonder as well. And, they're dumping Nicole Beasley, and I never like an offense where the number one receiver is this little slot guy. I mean, and Cole Beasley is not Chris Hogan. Let me put that out there. No one give me the Patriots offense thing. This is the Cowboys. Zeke Elliott's the only Cowboy offensively, and if you have him, you're starting.
Tom Brady makes all those white slot receivers over the past 10 years. It's not. Wes Welker was a great receiver, but it was Tom Brady that made him.
And was Wes Welker really a great receiver, or did he go from Tom Brady to Peyton Manning?
Exactly.
I mean, it's a toss-up, but Danny Amendola might never be heard from again in Miami.
Yeah.
It's just not there. But from the Cowboys, from the Giants, I'll tell you what, as much as I don't like him, Odell Beckham can really play some football when he wants to. Good God. And Saquon is
I'm so glad they finally paid him, so that way, he doesn't have to play, not that he would, but he doesn't have to play scared, theoretically having in the back of his mind, if I get hurt again, it's going to hurt my my contract going into the season. I'm so glad they got him paid so that way he can just be the beast of a receiver that he is.
Sterling Shepard, by the way, today, I don't know too much about it, but at one point today was listed as questionable, so that's something to keep an eye on. He's obviously their number 2 receiver. He's a guy that's going to come out and get some volume. I mean, Eli throws to 3 people, but he throws to 3 people. They can come out and get 10 receptions, 5 and 7. But yeah, I would hold off on Sterling until you know
what it is.
What it is, but
what it is.
Right.
Yeah, the Giants last year gave up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks and tight ends, and they were in the top 10 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs and wide receivers. So if there's ever been a get-right game for the Cowboys, it's this week against the Giants.
At home.
Yeah, at home. And yeah, like you were saying, it's a it's a division rival game, and division teams know each other so well, but these two teams, like both have made such a transformation from last year, considering how the Giants were down Odell Beckham the whole season. They didn't have Saquon Barkley. The offensive line was horrible, and with the Cowboys losing Jason Witten and Dez, like they look like two completely different teams. So
oh yeah,
it could be a shootout. It could be a Cowboys running up the time of possession with the run game. It could be Odell just going off for 2 touchdowns and 100+ yards. So this is another interesting game week one, it's so hard to get a read off of. We have no idea what they're going to look like.
Which is why I'm going to say this last caveat on this game, and we'll move on. Don't drop your Cowboys wide receivers yet. Okay. Let's wait and see. Maybe Dak really is a good quarterback, and it's just trying to get used to this receiving core, because any one of them could become the number one. So hold off on getting rid of anyone just in case in 4 weeks you're kicking yourself because Michael Gallup ends up being a 10 reception a game guy.
And I'm, real quick before we go on to the next game, I'm not super high on Cole Beasley, but in DFS lineups, I still think he's a great value for whatever he's going to cost. He's never going to be an expensive guy, and he showed last week, they give him the targets, and he's going to catch balls for you. Yeah, maybe he's not going to burn you down the field, but he's going to get some points for you.
Right, 5 catches, 50 yards, pays his price.
Yeah. So the next game is Colts at Redskins. This is another game where in the Colts last year were in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to all 4 of the major position groups. So I see Adrian Peterson having another huge game. He had 26 attempts last week for 96 yards and a touchdown. They threw him the ball 3 times. He caught 2 of them for another 70 yards. So, I look for Adrian Peterson to have another high-volume game. And for the Chris Thompson owners out there, even with Adrian Peterson seeing that much volume, he still had a great game. He had 5 carries for 65 yards. That's a great yards per carry right there. And he caught 6 of his 7 targets for another 63 yards and a touchdown. So I think you can feel confident playing both of those running backs. I don't think you have to worry about one taking from the other. I think they both have their roles solidified, and they're both really good at what they do.
Especially with the receiving corps that Alex Smith is not comfortable with, and that was very obvious as well. He can throw the ball to the running back. I think Chris Thompson's going to benefit with that heavily.
Right. We saw last week the Colts allowed 150 total yards and a touchdown to Joe Mixon on just 22 carries. So, if they give Peterson another 25 to 30 touches, could explode. I like all 3 tight ends in this matchup, actually, and I think both of the Colts tight ends are a good replacement to Olsen or Walker. If you were one of the guys that lost them, probably Ebron was more available than Doyle, but if you can get your hands on either one of them, I think that's a nice solid replacement for you. Last year, the Redskins gave up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends, so I see both of those tight ends having a good matchup.
Especially with Norman on TY.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing to look at with Andrew Luck, there was some. I drafted Andrew Luck in one of my leagues, and everybody was, making fun of me. Oh, you're taking a guy that's coming into the league season hurt. He's, missed the whole season last year, and I think I got him in like the 10th or 11th round. And I said, you guys wait. If he's healthy, he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback every week if he's healthy because of what he can do with his legs. It was really encouraging to see last week. He had 53 pass attempts. He distributed the ball around to, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different receivers. That's what he does. He spreads the ball around. He's hard to game plan against. And he showed there was a couple plays where he took off and ran and took some pretty big hits, and he got up and he was fine. So I'm super excited about Andrew Luck for the rest of the season. I'm really glad that it seems like he's back, and hopefully it wasn't just a one-game wonder. But we'll see. T.Y. Hilton, you're going to play him. It's the Colts running backs that it's interesting here. It's going to be tough. And this is another reason this is another one of the backfields that I stayed away from on draft day because I don't want all this mess of deciding, which one is going to be the guy. Wilkins 14 attempts to Hines' 5. Wilkins only had 3 targets, caught all 3 of them, but Hines had caught 7 of his 9 targets. So, and the Redskins gave up the 8th most fantasy points to running backs last year. So you can probably feel comfortable playing either one of them. So if you have any one of them, you need a flex play. I think you can feel comfortable about playing any one of those. So let us move on to the last game of the Week 2 fantasy football preview here, and we have the Seattle Seahawks playing the Chicago Bears.
Boy, after last week, that made this game much more interesting, didn't it? Seattle's defense, again, you got Earl Thomas, you got a few big names still, but that defense
Earl
is
Thomas
vulnerable.
coming off the freaking couch, bro. Didn't play it
Just
down in the
dominates.
preseason, comes out and gets a pick 6.
I hate that he's on that defense still because he's the type of person on any other defense on a team that might compete better.
You better watch out because he might be a Cowboy next year, and you're going to have to
I'll be eating those
deal with
words.
that.
You know what? If he becomes a Cowboy, that will be devastating. That will be devastating. But I'm not even going to get into that because of the draft. I don't even want to get into how Earl Thomas should have been a bird. But okay, let's talk this game here.
We'll talk about that after the podcast because I definitely want to hear that.
Trubisky. I think Trubisky is going to come out. I really like the Chicago offense this week against this defense. I think that you can throw on the Seahawks, and I think that Matt Nagy he's going to throw on the Seahawks.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised to see Tyreek Cohen have a good game. In fact, both running backs might probably have a good game because I think they'll use Jordan Howard to really set that up.
It was interesting last week with the Bears. Jordan Howard outsnapped, ran more routes, and got more targets than Tyreek Cohen. So maybe there is something to what Matt Nagy was saying in the offseason, how he sees Jordan Howard as a 3-down back, and he has no problem keeping him in there on 3rd down and throwing him the ball. So maybe we kind of overlooked Jordan Howard. Maybe he has more value in a PPR league than we thought.
I think we're going to see a situation that comes out kind of similar to Atlanta where on any given game you could start one or the other. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it won't.
Right.
I think this might be one of those weeks where both running backs do their thing. Jordan Howard with the rushing yards. I think they'll try and target Tyreek Cohen a little more just to keep the offense consistent, especially after the Packers came out and just in half a quarter, put up that many points and they couldn't get anything going.
Yeah.
But, the one thing that I cannot wait to watch in this game is Khalil Mack versus Russell Wilson. My God, I've never seen a defensive player at that position affect a game that much like that in the beginning.
Especially, and another guy that didn't play a snap in preseason comes out and has, I think he had a sack, an interception, a forced fumble, and a touchdown in the first quarter.
And not only did he not play a sack in the preseason, he wasn't even on this team in the preseason.
Yeah.
Like, this guy doesn't even know the defense, and he's out there just wreaking havoc on the top offense.
Just go be you. Just go be the 2-time defensive player of the year at 2 different positions. How the Raiders let this guy go... those first-round picks better be the best first-round picks they ever make. It better not be another freaking kicker in the first round.
I'll tell you what. The chance of you drafting a Khalil Mack again are slim to none.
Yeah.
What do you think about Trey Burton this week?
I hope he has...
Quiet last week.
Yeah. So, I was really surprised at how the Bears got so conservative after Rodgers went down. Once they got up to that 20-3 lead, they just kind of tried sailing through the rest of the game. I'm sure they weren't counting on Aaron Rodgers coming back out like a freaking movie star,
like the GOAT.
But dude, you're a first-year head coach. You have this reputation as a great offensive mind. You come from the Andy Reid tree. You're playing the Packers at home.
It's a confidence game for your quarterback
on
too.
Sunday Night Football. You guys got flexed up to the Sunday night spot from 1:00. Showcase what you can do, and the tight end that you just mentioned, Burton, they brought him in this offseason, obviously, because they like what they saw from what he did with the Eagles last year. He definitely has a very unique skill set when it comes to tight ends. And for them to, barely use him, it was weird, man. I really hope he comes out and has a decent game to kind of justify people's hype of him, because I think he's going to be great.
Especially considering that they really only have one wide receiver. Miller or whatever his name is has done nothing to sit there and say, well, we don't need Trey Burton.
Yeah, he made a couple plays, but he definitely did not shine as much as what Trey Burton showed last year.
Right. Like, I mean, the guy got the benefit of the doubt. It's just, if I'm Trubisky and I want to get Trey Burton involved.
The one thing, the interesting thing here is it could be a revenge game for Brandon Marshall, especially with Doug Baldwin most likely being out this game with that MCL sprain that he's got. And the Seahawks receivers, that's really the only matchup in this game that's not horrible for the Seahawks. The Bears gave up the seventh fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks and tight ends, and the sixth fewest fantasy points to running backs. So I think the Seahawks are going to really have to try and focus on throwing the ball to their receivers in this game to really move the ball at all. And hopefully the Bears come out and, hopefully there's not a hangover from that demoralizing loss to Aaron Rodgers.
You just want to see a good Monday night game at that point.
Yeah. So that does it for the Week 2 preview episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. We will be back next week for the Week 3 preview. Obviously, we're going to pretty much most likely do it the same exact way we did this episode. We're going to just go through every game. We're going to give you some DFS highlights that we like, and we're going to talk about guys that we see having big games that week. So tune in and enjoy your week. Enjoy Thursday Night Football this week. Should be a good game. Interdivision rivals, Bengals, Ravens. So I'm excited about the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, good luck and God bless with these fantasy injuries, because it's going to keep happening weeks 1 through 3 to 4. So keep your heads on a swivel.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. To listen to our episodes or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app, available on Android and iDevices, or visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find all of our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors, podcasts, and other content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.